Bending the sides. In previous videos, I've shown you pictures of me bending the sides of the guitar. In this video, you'll see the sides bent. This whole process takes about 30 minutes. No, I'm not going to make you watch in real time. It is somewhat boring and most of us don't have time to watch that long. I will speed up the timeline as much as possible. The first part is more like a cooking video. I take the book matched sides and lay them on the table in front of me so that I can roughly measure the aluminum foil. I pull out only what is needed and a slight bit more so that it goes past each end of the sides. Then I cut the width of it so that it overlaps on the top by about 3 inches. I fold one side of it along the back of the wood as it is laid on the table. Then I begin spraying the foil under the sides. Then I lay them down in the water and spray on the other side. It doesn't take much water. Then I wrap the other side and seal off the ends on itself. Now we have the meat for our sandwich. Next, we mark the top of the T and check to make sure that we have the sides oriented so that the top, which is the narrower end of the sides, is on the correct end. We now lay the sides like in the bread of a sandwich. The bread is the stainless steel slats. These provide a little support so that the bend doesn't tend to break. Then we place the heat blanket on the top of the sandwich. I always lay the blanket out so that the plug end is at the top. It really doesn't matter. Now we place the sandwich of materials and the heat blanket in the bending jig so that the top leaves enough material to go around the bend. And I usually just eyeball it, but you can measure it. The straight material is now in the jig, but it only has enough tension to hold it in place. It's time to plug in the thermostat and start heating. Without any heat applied, the heat blanket is about 80 degrees. In a matter of just a few seconds, it is already 109 degrees. Our target temperature is around 230 degrees. The paddock sides will become plastic at about 230 degrees. I don't want to overheat the wood. I just want it hot enough to bend and not burn the wood. Usually you will hear and see the water vapor coming off of the material ever so slightly. I start with bending the most difficult bend, which is the waist. I am turning the clamp very slowly. It's not hard to turn. I just use 2 hands on it so I can regulate my speed. It would likely break the wood if I bent it real fast. There are no cracking sounds as a bend. If you hear cracking, that's not a good sign. Once the middle bottoms out onto the jig, I usually do the upper bout next, since it is the second most difficult bend. I put on an oven mitt because the heat blanket is very hot. I put it on my right hand and simply rest it lightly on the end of the material. The weight of my hand is enough so that it begins to bend. I don't put much pressure on it. Only a little more than the weight of my hand works well. Here I can feel the wood bending. All I want to do now is just follow it. Once it gets around the top about a little ways, I follow it with a springed block. I move it as far as I can with one hand and then begin walking it around the curve of the upper bout. When I built this jig, I exaggerated the bends just a little. That is, I made them a little tighter than the necessary. I did this because when the wood comes out of the mold, it will have a little spring back. This is normal. I do what I can throughout the project to reduce the tension. I don't want any tension. I want the bent parts to naturally lay out and not be forced. I believe it helps the tone of the instrument in the long run. After the upper bout is bent, I move to the lower bout. The bending here is very easy because it is not as tight of a radius, so it goes pretty fast. I put the mitt on my left hand, and just the weight of my hand is enough to start the bend. Once the whole side is bent, I add 2-foot clamps to the bottom of the jig to hold the ends tight against the jig. Then I leave it to sit with the heat on for about 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I turn off the heat and let it return to room temperature, which is about 85 degrees, for about an hour. I turn the heat back on after the hour is done and leave it for another 20 minutes. I have found that the parts that get this second heat treatment tend to hold their shape quite well. When the 20 minutes are complete, I turn off the heat and leave it sit in the mold for another hour. After the hour has passed, it's time to see how we came out. I remove the clamps, the spring blocks, and back off the jig clamp and remove the assembly from the jig. Then I remove the heat blanket and the stainless steel slats. Then I carefully remove the aluminum foil from the sides. They came out just right, and I'm pleased. I'll bring it over a little closer to the camera so you can see it. It is held its shape well, and what little spring back there is, it will fit well into the mold. That's all there is to bending the sides. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. Thanks for watching.